Sorry to put you on freeze like that. Did you have a good nap? Good, because it's time to get back to work. If you missed part 1, make sure you check it out, though you'll be happy to know we've escaped the bottom layer of mediocrity now. The following entries are firmly planted in the realm of flawed but good. Infinity War is fast approaching, so let's jump right in. Number 24. No, we're not quite done with the TV shows yet, and I was really annoyed having to hop over onto Hulu. But Runaways was a surprising treat. You'd be forgiven for thinking it isn't MCU canon. I know, most of the Marvel stuff is set in New York. This one's hiding out in California with no mention of the other films or shows. But I guess the characters react to all this supernatural stuff with a bit less skepticism, since we've been living in a world where aliens attacked New York a few years back. And look, WHIH is on TV. MCU confirmed. If each Marvel project is like mixing superheroes with another genre, then Runaways is like Marvel's OC drama. A lot like Smallville if you were into that. The sci-fi stuff is slightly muted, but there's a little bit of everything. Some crazy high tech, some magic, alien powers, a dinosaur. They don't shy away from what made the comic a hit, especially the rebellious teen angst. If you find teen dramas unbearable, then this show is going to grate on you. Some of these line deliveries border on parody, but I was impressed with its occasional ability to deal with some complex emotional issues. Mainly it's the kids discovering that their parents are members of a supervillain cult. The show certainly caters to teens who might be similarly disenchanted with their parents, but takes just as much time to develop the adults. I'll let you decide which characters are sympathetic victims of circumstance and which ones are just monsters, but I think more lean toward the former. I was especially impressed with the story dealing with the father's abusive nature towards his son, and how the son cutting him out of his life is easier said than done. If I had one gripe I had to say, it's that like Smallville or Heroes, the show teeters whenever it wants to actually do a superhero battle. There's a moment in the second last episode that feels like it's supposed to be the big hero-villain showdown. You got all the friends standing in a cool epic line, but it just peters out. In these scenes, characters don't so much fight as they take turns doing things. There's no fight choreography, it's just not that kind of show. If you're the type of person who uses the term millennial as an insult, there's not much here for you. But I can stomach a lot of cheese and angst and ended up really intrigued for season 2. Plus, not everything has to be for me, you know? The Marvel movies are actually what got me back into comics. If this is helping a new generation get into comics in the first place, I'm all for it. The sophomore slump of Avengers movies, the climax to Phase 2 just couldn't live up to its own dizzying expectations. Age of Ultron isn't bad. Looking at its merits on paper, it should be even better than the Avengers. You spend more time with the team assembled, we're able to better explore the characters, there's more action, more heroes, everything's bigger and deeper. But for some reason it's easier to recount the flaws in this movie than the merits. When you stop and think about it, Avengers was narratively a very simple movie. Here things feel a little overcomplicated. You have to stuff in Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, Vision, the Hulkbuster armor, Ulysses Claw, Baron von Strucker, all pretty cool things, but it feels like there's not enough time devoted to any of them. Whoever your favorite Avenger is, you won't get quite enough of them. And even the ways in which it feels similar to the first film feel like they were done better previously. Philosophically, Ultron is an interesting character. I like how he tries to dismantle the Avengers, how he looks at Iron Man as an uncaring father, but at the end of the day, his plan isn't psychological like he is. It's just another bombastic doomsday plot where the Avengers have to fight another army of punchable nukes. Future films got to slow down and explain the deal with Scarlet Witch and Vision, but in this movie I'm really begging for some clarification. And some of the new Hulk scenes just feel like failed attempts to recapture that lightning in a bottle from the first film. It's a common complaint that the newer Marvel movies have a forced sense of humor that undercuts the exciting moments. I think this is where that really started. Doesn't bother me too much though, and conceptually I don't hate Natasha and Bruce Banner being together, I just think it wasn't developed well enough. Age of Ultron is a big mess, but there's a lot of small things that I still love about it. As the movie that started it all, Iron Man had to be good on its own. It wasn't like now, where we go see the new Marvel movie no matter what. If it wasn't a success, this whole cinematic universe would have ended before it even started. Incredible Hulk certainly wasn't going to pick up any slack. Iron Man captured the public eye with what, at the time, was a fairly unknown character outside of comic shops, and I'm so glad it did. On a personal note though, unlike other movies, it's not one I particularly feel like rewatching. This might be a me thing, but the techno-military genre isn't as interesting as the motifs the other movies go with. Also, this movie has a serious problem with plot structure. We get the origin story, see Tony build his suit in a cave with a box of scraps, mount an awesome escape scene, but then we have more than half a movie left, with the conflict being driven by the second most forgettable villain in the series. Thankfully, it completely doesn't matter thanks to 3 simple words: Robert Downey Jr. What an out-of-the-blue perfect casting choice. This character could read the phone book and it would be engaging. Rarely do you see one actor carrying a movie this well single-handedly. Not to speak any less of Happy Hogan and the voice of Jarvis. Oh, and Gwyneth Paltrow. I guess. But watching Downey as he performs in some, for the time, amazing action sequences, develop the suit, flirt with Pepper, it doesn't even matter that this movie doesn't have a third act. I like it a lot, just not as much as the other movies. And if this is one of your favorites, I can absolutely see why. This is where my biases really start to affect the ratings. Thor: The Dark World, objectively, is probably the weakest MCU film. But I really like the Thor franchise. Thor's my favorite Avenger, Loki's my favorite villain, Asgard's my favorite location, and I love when we can get into all of this mythological hullabaloo. Fantasy takes precedence over sci-fi for me, but the second Thor movie comes up short on a lot of expectations. Thor 1 did the otherworldly hero trapped on Earth storyline a la Inhumans, though unlike Inhumans, manages to get into enough cool fantasy world stuff in Jotunheim and Asgard. For a sequel, I expect to see even more of that. The plot involves a harmonic convergence of all 9 realms. Have you ever read Norse mythology? I want to see all the other realms that we didn't see the first time around, but aside from Red Sand World and boring Dark Elf World, home to the first most forgettable villain in the series, there's not much new here. Part of it might be me expecting the movie to be what I wanted out of it. I was expecting Thor, Loki, Jane Foster, Sif, and the Warriors 3 romping between worlds. But what we get has a lot less imagination. Even Asgard is looking a lot darker than last time. This is not a pretty film to look at. Anthony Hopkins is still killing it as Odin though. Same for Idris Elba as Heimdall. Mjolnir is still the coolest weapon ever. Humor blends nicely into the action, and more Loki is never a bad thing. I also don't hate Natalie Portman in these movies. Not that much. I really like her as an actress, she just doesn't have any chemistry with Chris Hemsworth. I can't blame them for writing her out of Ragnarok. The last problem I'll say is that you get to the end of the movie and can't help but feel like the whole thing was just a setup for other movies. I mean, yeah, great cliffhanger, but why can't we go straight to the movie where Loki's on the throne? Loyal Asgardians are rewarded, but left wanting. I had mixed feelings coming out of this movie. Doctor Strange is one of my favorite Marvel characters, but I was never a huge fan of his comics. What I really like though is when he shows up in other people's books, or for events. So the most important question for me, is Benito Cucumber a good Doctor Strange? Unequivocally, yes. Phew, you had me nervous there, Marvel. Is the movie good? Well, I think it's more of an okay movie with some really good parts in it. Besides Strange and the Ancient One, I don't find myself too engaged with these characters. Oh, and Christine, I liked her. I really want to like Wong, but he's criminally underutilized in this movie. I think I'll like him more when he's more involved. And Caecilius would probably be the third most forgettable villain if he was the main villain. Luckily, Dormammu hijacks the story at the end. When the movie tries to force Strange into the standard Marvel formula, it can feel a bit flat. After all, the Doctor Strange comics weren't the standard Marvel comics. But when it's just being clever or letting the visuals speak for themselves, it's unparalleled. The backwards time fight? Awesome. The astral projection fight in the hospital? Awesome. The cape and all the other magic doodads are cool. Bargaining with Dormammu is mimetic genius. And while I don't think the fights in the mirror world completely land, they're a feast for the eyes. It's not about the destination, it's about the trip. And this movie is a serious trip. More importantly, it gets Strange in the MCU, so now he can do cooler stuff in other people's movies. As he should. Here's another movie usually ranked at the bottom of Marvel's collection. Some would consider it heresy that I like it more than the original, but I just don't see what the problem is. I would way rather watch Iron Man 2 than Iron Man 1. You've got 2 villains with actual presence, still not great, but serviceable. You got War Machine in awesome armor battles, and you have Tony Stark forced to confront his character flaws. I think this movie was so exciting to me mainly because of the MCU itself. I know, each movie has to stand on its own, but they don't exist in a vacuum. With Iron Man being a huge success, Incredible Hulk good enough, and 3 more Marvel movies in production, this was the first movie where we went in knowing about the shared continuity. This is when the MCU became real. You got the perfect Black Widow showing up, an Easter egg alluding to Cap, Nick Fury talking more about the Avengers, and a post-credits teaser for Thor that had me jumping in my seat. Are these little nods what make a good movie? Of course not. But it's what made me love this movie leagues more than Iron Man 1 or Hulk. And you know, it's okay for Iron Man movies to have less than stellar villains. Tony Stark has always been his own worst enemy anyway. This movie gets that. If that means watching a privileged billionaire drunkenly destroying his home in a pointless fight with Rhodey, well, so be it. Following Iron Man 2, we have Iron Man 4. I kid. But seriously, this is like an Iron Man reunion. Even Happy and the stupid crane robot are back. I gotta tell you, I loved Tom Holland as Peter Parker in Civil War. I thought he was exactly the kind of Spider-Man we needed in this franchise, and I still do. That said, I'm sorry to say I was really disappointed in this movie, which doesn't mean I didn't like it. Where do I start? Tom Holland remains a great Peter Parker. I think having a younger Parker in high school sets this rendition apart, while also recapturing the original roots of the character. The movie frequently has me laughing, the young actors all bring their A-game, and Michael Keaton as the Vulture is a godsend. That scene where Peter and Vulture are in the car together, that's the most tense scene in any of the Marvel movies. I guess I just expected more. Homecoming had the hurdle that the other movies haven't had. There's already a really popular movie version of this character. Two, in fact, though I'm not really a big fan of the Garfield version. It's not that we're sick of Spider-Man, though we are tired of him getting rebooted. I think Holland sets his apart enough to be relevant. It's that there's a lot of important pieces of Spidey lore left out of this movie for fear of redundancy. Like, did Uncle Ben die in this universe? I'm pretty sure he did. He seems to allude to that in Civil War, but we never get confirmation on that. It's like the movie's afraid to talk about him. By and large, Homecoming doesn't have the personal stakes that the same Raimi movies had. Holland Parker is trying to prove himself a hero. That's a good enough story, but it can't match the weight of Maguire Parker's guilt over Uncle Ben's death. We know Spidey wants to be an Avenger, but why? Because of that monologue in Civil War? We'll talk about it in this movie. When Spidey has to lift all that rubble at the end, it should be an emotional climax, but it just hasn't been earned because we haven't seen the same emotional turmoil. Maybe I'm trying to fit a round peg in a square hole. I still really like this movie. It just doesn't amount to much in the end, even though it's really smart. Also, I don't really like the high-tech Spidey suit. I mean, they execute it well, just in concept it takes something away from what made Spidey unique. He's not supposed to be like Iron Man, get all those gadgets out of there, which I guess is what the movie eventually does, so, whatever. Maybe Spider-Man will be like Doctor Strange and be more fun in the team-ups than on his own. That's how it looks so far. I'm just glad to finally have him home with Marvel again. With great intellectual property comes great responsibility. Unpopular opinion, Iron Man 3 is the best Iron Man movie. I know, it's so stupid. There's plot holes you can fly a Quinjet through. Like, if Tony's expecting the Mandarin to attack his home, why has he not battle-tested the new armor yet? And I hate when he blows up all the suits. There has to be something charitable you can do with all that, Tony. That's millions of dollars. But Iron Man 3 successfully proved we could go back to normal standalone movies after the Avengers. And it's neat how the events of the Avengers have already affected Tony, giving him full-blown PTSD. A complaint I hear is that there's not enough Iron Man in this Iron Man movie. Most of the time his suit is powered down or unusable. But in my view, this is the best Tony Stark movie. He's terrified now that he's discovered how big the universe really is, and he feels helpless without his suit. The story is him remembering that he's the man who invented the suit in the first place. The suit isn't the hero, he is. We get to see that Stark ingenuity at work, and these scenes between him and the kid, hilarious. I need more Robert Downey Jr. being a dick to children. Iron Man 3 is an important step in the Tony Stark character journey, which moving forward continues to be a driving force in the franchise. Tony manages to overcome his fear for now, but it's the same fear that drives his actions in Ultron, and from that his regret that influences him in Civil War. I'm expecting this to come to a head in Infinity War. This wasn't the real finale to the Iron Man story, it was Tony's jumping off point into the greater Marvel universe. And as that, it's an unmitigated success, even if they had to retcon aspects of it later. Oh, and nice misdirection with the Mandarin, guys. I know it's hard to surprise us comic nerds, but using the book continuity against us? Brilliant! Okay, I think I'm ready to talk about TV again, especially now that we have some shows that are better than the average movie. I don't know whose idea it was to make a show following Peggy Carter after the first Captain America movie, but whoever you are, I love you. Season 1 of Agent Carter is what I like to call the good version of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. There's a solid concrete plot right from the get-go, with one central character to follow. She has an external conflict, the emergence of a Russian super science syndicate called Leviathan, and she has an internal conflict, a need to prove herself as more than Captain America's girlfriend, while still trying to move on from his supposed death. While at first Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was hard to get a feel for, the 1940s backdrop gives this show instant charm and aesthetic. And I'll say it one more time, Haley Atwell is a gift to this franchise. Those curt remarks wouldn't be much good without a great supporting cast, however. We get Agent Suda, played by that guy I really like from Dollhouse, the welcome return of Howard Stark, and as an amazing reveal for the MCU, Stark's butler, Edwin Jarvis. I freaking love this! See, in the original comics, Jarvis wasn't an AI like in the Iron Man movies, he was Tony's actual butler. This pays homage to the character's origins, and implies that Tony was so fond of his childhood caretaker that he named his computer assistant after him. That's adorable, and something that doesn't need to be explained to be great. Well, I guess I just explained it, but the show doesn't. It helps that Jarvis is also a hilarious and capable sidekick to Carter. And I can't forget Dottie, who gives a chilling performance as Carter's surprise rival. And another neat connection as she's an agent of the Red Room, the same organization that would eventually train Black Widow. This is how you do fan service, because it's not just fan service, it's fan service by way of incredibly interesting, plot-relevant characters. I think the woman empowerment in Agent Carter is something we can all get behind. It's hard enough fighting Leviathan, but Carter faces constant resistance from societal expectations of her, like how her boss doesn't want her involved in the big cases, or even an all-girl boarding house disallowing men past the first floor. It constantly creates obstacles, large and small, and makes Carter an underdog we want to succeed, because she doesn't deserve to be the underdog in the first place. It also doesn't point the finger accusingly at its audience. It's the 40s, we all know it's super regressive. but it's also enough to make you at least consider how you conduct yourselves with women in the workplace, or how you are a woman if you are one. I don't know, I think it's really well done, okay? Maybe it's not the biggest thrill ride in the series, but it gave me hope for Marvel TV when I needed it most. I guess that's why Season 2 didn't feel as prolific. We just didn't need it anymore. On the other side of the chromosome, we have the testosterone-fueled Punisher. After John Bernthal's stellar performance in Daredevil Season 2, it's no wonder they rushed him a spin-off. Frank Castle brings all his badass action scenes, his muscly grit, and his teddy bear charm over to his solo series. Look at those puppy dog eyes, he's so sad! Now, I don't get invested in these kinds of shows easily. I've never been a gun person, which is clearly who they're marketing to. The intro is straight-up gun porn. But the action scenes understand that guns don't kill people, Frank Castle kills people. They're awesome because you can tell he's an expertly trained Marine. The kills are just as much about his ingenuity as his equipment, and a lot of standoffs just come down to emotional fortitude. This helped carry me through the first third of the show, where admittedly I was having trouble engaging with the plot. Like these two detectives. Geez, who cares? Just show us who Frank wants revenge on. There we go. Okay, now I can follow this. In the meanwhile, we get Frank's wonderful new sidekick, Micro. A great foil that matches Frank's combat wisdom with technological know-how. They complement each other great. Micro's family and Frank's subsequent interaction with them is the real heart of this story. It's too late for Frank, but maybe he can help someone else not suffer what he suffered. The show tackles a lot of interrelated issues in my favorite kind of way, not really offering answers, but showing us the questions. The themes mostly center around disenfranchisement of our nation's veterans, post-traumatic stress disorder, coming back home from war to discover you don't belong home anymore. It showcases and explores them in a way that's investing without being preachy. I really feel for these characters, and Frank's last line in the series, it freaking kills me. The writing, acting, and staging all come together to make something truly great. Just keep your distance if you're faint of heart. The last few episodes do not hold back. Things get red. This should lighten the mood. AntMan. Actually, I cried the last time I saw this movie. I know, really embarrassing. I have a soft spot for parenting stories. He just wants to be a good father. Okay, sorry. This is a comedy. And a darn good one. Finally adding this long overdue member of the original Avengers, Ant-Man does something really smart and skips the origin part of the story. Sort of. Our main character isn't the original Ant-Man, Hank Pym, but his protege, Scott Lang. We're introduced to this world through him, but we don't have to sit through the characters learning how to develop the technology, which is a nice change of pace for me. I'm getting kind of tired of starting these heroes from square one. So now we can get right into the crazy shrinking technology, which in terms of cinematic effect and comedy action has never been done this well in a movie. Ever. Never mind how the way they explain the suit doesn't make scientific sense. I mean, if it's changing his size but maintaining his density, how does he not break this record player? No, don't think about the science too much, just try and have fun. You know how I was talking about secondary genres before? Well, besides being a superhero movie, Ant-Man is first and foremost a heist movie, in the vein of Ocean's 11 or The Italian Job. This is where the movie shines. Well, that and those beautifully awkward scenes with Lewis. I love that guy. Things get a little stale when they have to get emotional. Hank Pym's feud with his daughter never really landed for me. It depends a bit too much on characters being dumb for the sake of having a conflict. But as I said before, the stuff between Scott and his daughter hits me way harder than it should. Ugh, forgive me. My sister's about to have her first baby, and I'm about to become an uncle, and I'm an emotional mess. If the movie feels disjointed, it's because the original director left. Supposedly because the studio was compromising his vision by making him include all these Marvel tie-ins. I like the tie-ins, I don't think they're too intrusive, but it makes me sad that they had to change directors to get them. So if the film feels segmented, that's why. But you know what else is segmented? Ants. It all comes to a head in an action scene that maybe isn't earned by the narrative, just something you do because it's a Marvel movie. But it's such a crazy inventive fight that it's totally worth it. I hate that they ruined some of these gags by showing them in the trailer though. I would have lost my mind if these could have surprised me in the actual movie. Ant-Man is a definite oddball, but these are comic book movies. Shut up and have some fun for once. Along a similar trend, Thor. Big, bombastic, uncomplicated fun, but with less plot holes and tonal dissonance than Ant-Man. Not that little plot holes are gonna ruin a movie, but they seem pretty big when you're the size of a dust speck. In a time where the mainstream is contractually obligated to see every new Marvel movie, it's easy to forget how much of a risk this movie was in 2011. Iron Man was a pretty obscure name, but who outside the fandom knew or cared about Thor? And what assurance was there that people would enjoy an admittedly weird high-concept sci-fi fantasy superhero crossbreed? There was no guarantee. This could have easily been a big-budget flop, but they decided to just make it the best they could, lean into that fantasy, and pray to Valhalla that people would appreciate it. Asgard as a planet is richly realized, with Shakespearean-trained actors like Anthony Hopkins brought on to lend the gods an appropriate level of gravitas. It's a little overblown and overdramatic, but these are demigods we're talking about. It should feel big. On the other side of the Bifrost, the puny humans help ground the feature and give Thor a sense of humanity. It may seem oddly mundane to cast Kat Dennings from Two Broke Girls in a Marvel movie, but considering that Thor's lesson is about learning humility, it makes sense to team him up with all these clashingly normal characters. Also, Natalie Portman does really well on her own. Again, it's only her chemistry with Thor that's lacking. The government took away her science, she worked hard on that. I want her to get it back. The CGI is pretty dated in places, but if you're not being a graphical snob, the designs are really cool, and the few big magical fight scenes are as fun as they are thrilling. And what more can I say about Tom Hiddleston that hasn't already been said? He's just the right combination of smart, funny, threatening, and pathetic. The real star of the show for me isn't a character though, it's Mjolnir. Man, they made this thing cool. Just the sound of it when Thor changes his grip, you can feel the weight and power in this thing. It's a little messy at times. I often feel like they're not focusing on the interesting parts of the story, something that the sequel will do little to amend. Check out the deleted scenes if you can. I think they should have kept some of these. They fill in the character establishment that feels lacking in the final product. But guys, I love this movie. I just can't get enough Thor. Another! We're getting into some great territory now. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 may not have felt great to everybody when they first saw it, but I assure you, it is. Yeah, I was a bit underwhelmed when I first saw it in theaters. It couldn't match the freshness that the first movie had, but it's one that I like more and more with each viewing. Volume 2 takes its chance not to match its predecessor in scope, but rather to delve deeper into the characters. Sit and think on it a bit, or find an analysis on YouTube, and you'll discover that Volume 2 is actually a cohesive study about family. Star-Lord is reluctantly reconnecting with his father, Gamora and Nebula are at war over the trauma of their abusive upbringing, Drax as ever is the heart of the story who knows the pain of love and loss, and Rocket needs to learn from Yondu about how he's sabotaging every good relationship he ever encounters. And now they have a baby to take care of. Building off of the line from the first movie, all of them are losers. They've lost things, and they keep making mistakes because they fear losing more. The last movie brought them together as friends, but it's this adventure where they test if that makes them a family, which means accepting all the crappy stuff, not just the happy stuff. Then again, with characters like Ego or Thanos, we see that some family ties just need to be severed, and with Yondu, some family ties are really complicated. Ego doesn't get to do all the cool things I expect the living planet to do, but I like how he fits into the family theme. As a villain, he suffers from the delusion that just because he's Peter's father, he has some ownership over him. That's a neat and relatable angle. The soundtrack, like last time, is spectacular, and I find myself laughing a lot, even if it occasionally feels like they're trying too hard. You might get taken out of the action at times, that's all I'm saying. And if you're a Marvel geek, sweet eternity the Easter eggs in this one. It says a lot about our society that one of the most nuanced and complex characters in recent movie history is Rocket Raccoon. I stand by that, and I'm prepared to fight you over it. One more today before we run out of steam, because shows like Daredevil Season 1 deserve the full gush treatment. Though I guess I pretty much covered what's good about this season when comparing it to the second. Kingpin, Kingpin, Kingpin. The whole rogues gallery, actually. Watching them scheme against each other is just as interesting as watching Daredevil try to defeat them. There's a lot of scripting problems when you get right down to it, but none of them matter too much when you're learning more about Wilson Fisk and figuring out how to stop him. Another thing I want to mention is the fight choreography, which oddly enough isn't quite as good in Season 2. The real standout is the fight in Episode 2. You know the one. It's all done in one take, supposedly, and you can feel Matt getting more and more battered. There's a visceral weight to every punch. They tried to top this fight in Season 2 with another one-take multi-man melee, but it was overcomplicated and harder to see, and Daredevil's just doing too well in this fight. We need that struggle. In Season 1, we fell in love with the supporting cast because they had such overwhelming odds to overcome. The first time you hear about Fisk, one of his cronies is so scared he impales himself. Then the first time we see him, he's completely calm. It's terrifying, because you know he's gonna snap at any moment, you just don't know when. Like Batman, Daredevil's villains are more interesting than he is, but he's still a hero we root for. It's great to learn about his background, his father, his incredibly mean mentor, and his connection to Foggy and eventually Karen. This show was the perfect way to kick off the Marvel Netflix world, and where I recommend starting if you're thinking of branching out into the Marvel shows. Final note I'm thinking about right now, the show is really good at visual storytelling. A lot of great scenes happen without any dialogue, which is kind of ironic because it means blind people will have a harder time enjoying this. Whoops. Some shows have the devil in them, but this one is a gift from above. Can you believe we've hit 28 entries already? Well, maybe you can. Either way, thanks for sticking with me for this long. If you're keeping count, that means all we have left is the top 10. I'll return soon to show you my best of the best. In the meantime, why not tell me your favorite Marvel movie or show in the comments? If you want to ask me in more detail about any of my previous choices, I'm always up for talking about it. This has been the Comic Foil, and until next time, fanboys, take 5. Excelsior!